Lonely rancher found a young Cherokee girl hanging on a tree with a sign, "White man, don't forgive." Welcome to Dusk Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Elias Vance decided it was time to check the south fence line. It wasn't just rain. It was a weeping sky, a relentless, icy curtain that obscured the distant mountains and turned the red earth of his ranch into a treacherous, sucking bog. Elias, a man carved from the same hard, silent rock as the land he worked, found a grim satisfaction in its bleakness. It matched the landscape of his soul. For 10 years, since his wife, Sarah, had succumbed to an illness that the closest town's limited hospital couldn't touch, Elias had retreated. His sprawling ranch, once a vibrant hub of life and laughter, had become a vast, empty expanse, each acre a testament to his solitude. He was a man of routines, of quiet, solitary tasks. He spoke more to his old border collie, Rusty, than to any human. His days were a long, monotonous rhythm of mending fences, tending to his small herd of cattle, and staring out at the horizon, waiting for nothing in particular. He was a ghost haunting his own life, a living monument to a love lost and a future that had dried up at the creek beds in summer. The town of Redemption, 20 miles away, was a place he visited only for supplies, a necessary evil. Its bustling general store, its gossiping locals, its neon-lit diner, they were reminders of a world he no longer belonged to, a world where people still laughed and shared their lives. He preferred the raw, untamed quiet of his land, the vast, indifferent sky, the company of the wind and the rain. But the fence line, a vital artery of his property, demanded his attention. The incessant rain would have turned the creek into a raging torrent, threatening to breach the old wire and send his cattle scattering across the wilderness. With a worn, oilskin slicker pulled tight against the biting wind and a rusty pair of wire cutters tucked into his belt, Elias mounted his sturdy quarter horse, Comanche. Rusty, a grizzled shadow, trotted faithfully at his heels, his tail a low, rhythmic thump against his master's leg. The ride to the creek was long and arduous. The normally gentle slopes of his ranch were treacherous with slick mud, forcing Comanche to pick his way carefully, his hooves sinking deep with every step. The rain lashed at Elias's face, stinging his eyes, but he pushed on, driven by the ingrained duty that was the last remaining anchor in his life. As they approached the swollen banks of Willow Creek, a place marked by a cluster of ancient, twisted cottonwoods, Elias felt a prickle of unease. It wasn't just the ominous roar of the creek, now a muddy, churning brown monster. It was something else, a subtle shift in the oppressive quiet, a presence that disturbed the desolate peace of the wilderness. Rusty, usually stoic, let out a low growl, his hackles rising, his gaze fixed on one of the larger cottonwoods. Elias pulled Comanche to a halt, his hand instinctively going to the rifle scabbard on his saddle. He was a man who knew the land and its dangers. A bear? A coyote too bold? But Rusty's growl was different, more wary than aggressive. It was the sound of a dog sensing something profoundly wrong. He dismounted, handing Comanche's reins to a low-hanging branch. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. He followed Rusty's unwavering gaze. The old cottonwood stood stark against the gray sky, its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. And there, hanging from one of the lower branches, swaying slightly in the unforgiving wind, was a figure. A small figure, dressed in what looked like light clothing, dark against the pale bark of the tree. A chill that had nothing to do with the biting wind seized Elias. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum against the silence. It was a person, a child. As he drew closer, pushing through the dripping undergrowth, the horrifying truth revealed itself. It was a girl, a young girl, maybe 10 or 11, her slender frame suspended by a rope tied roughly around her chest, just under her arms. Her head was slumped forward, her dark hair plastered to her face by the rain. Her bare feet dangled just inches above the churning water of the creek below. And then he saw the sign. Nailed crudely to the trunk of the tree, just above her head, was a piece of rough-hewn wood. Scrawled across it in angry, uneven letters, painted in what looked like dried mud or rust, were 4 words that froze the blood in his veins. "White man, don't forgive." The words were a brand, an accusation, a chilling declaration of hatred and vengeance. The girl was clearly Native American, her features unmistakable even in her unconscious state. She was Cherokee. Elias felt a surge of pure, unadulterated indignation. What unspeakable cruelty was this? Who could do something so monstrous? The rage, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to truly feel in years, ripped through the layers of his self-imposed numbness. This wasn't just a discovery, it was an incision, cutting deep into his carefully constructed wall of indifference. He moved quickly, his years of ranch work making him agile despite his age. He assessed the situation with practiced efficiency. The rope, though crudely tied, was tight. The girl was clearly unconscious, possibly hypothermic. Her skin was a pale, bluish white, and her lips were tinged purple. He had to get her down. Now! He tossed his wire cutters aside and pulled a sturdy Bowie knife from his belt, its blade glinting dully in the weak light. He reached up, his fingers searching for the knot, but it was too high, too tight. He cursed under his breath. He needed to get closer, to climb. He braced himself against the slick trunk of the cottonwood, digging his boots into the wet earth, and began to pull himself up, ignoring the pain in his old joints, ignoring the cold that was seeping into his bones. The chilling sign stared down at him, its brutal message a silent, menacing promise. The rain continued to fall, washing over the girl, washing over him, washing over the dark, ugly truth that had just been strung up on his fence line. This was not merely a problem to be solved. It was a confrontation, a desperate cry for justice that had landed, quite literally, at his doorstep. And Elias Vance, the lonely rancher, felt the heavy, undeniable weight of a responsibility he hadn't asked for, but knew he could not ignore. Elias scrambled up the wet, slick trunk of the cottonwood, his muscles protesting with sharp, agonizing spasms. His boots slipped on the mossy bark, and for a terrifying second, he thought he might lose his grip, sending them both tumbling into the roaring creek below. But years of clinging to bucking broncos and climbing rocky ledges had ingrained in him a tenacity that refused to yield. He dug his fingers into crevices, hauling his weight upward, his gaze fixed on the girl, on the fragile life that depended solely on his strength. The closer he got, the more terrifyingly clear her condition became. Her breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible, a mere whisper of air. Her skin was icy to the touch, and her small body was limp, utterly unresponsive. She was hypothermic, clinging to life by a thread. He reached the thick branch where the rope was tied, his arm aching with the effort. The knot was a crude, tightly drawn noose, a testament to the malicious intent of whoever had done this monstrous act. It took him several precious seconds to work his knife blade under the taut fibers, his fingers stiff with cold. The rope parted with a sudden, unnerving snap, and the girl's body went limp. For a horrifying moment, she started to slip, her weight pulling against him. Elias reacted instinctively, wrapping his arm around her chest, holding her tight against him, her small body disturbingly cold. He began the slow, perilous descent, one hand gripping the tree, the other cradling the girl, protecting her head as best he could. Every movement was a deliberate calculation, a battle against gravity and the slickness of the tree. He finally reached the muddy ground, his legs trembling, his lungs burning. He laid the girl gently on the saturated earth, carefully peeling back the thin, soaked fabric of her clothes to assess her condition. Her skin was mottled with purple and blue, a sign of severe hypothermia. There was a raw, red abrasion around her wrists and ankles, as if she had been bound before being hung. And on her forehead, just above her left eyebrow, was a crude, dried mark, a dark, smeared symbol that Elias couldn't quite decipher, but it radiated a sense of menace. It was clearly some form of tribal marking, twisted into something grotesque by whoever had placed her here. His own anger, which had been simmering, now boiled over into a righteous fury. This wasn't just an act of cruelty. It was an act of desecration, a deliberate attempt to humiliate and terrorize. He carefully wrapped her in his own worn wool coat, trying to impart some of his own body heat. Her shivering was violent, uncontrollable. She needed warmth, and she needed it fast. His cabin. It was his only hope. He couldn't risk leaving her here, exposed to the elements, nor could he waste precious minutes riding all the way to redemption. He lifted her carefully into his arms. She was surprisingly light, a fragile bundle of bones and cold flesh. Rusty whined, his nose nudging her hand, sensing the urgency and the distress. Elias clambered back onto Comanche, cradling the girl in front of him, protecting her from the biting wind as best he could. The ride back to the cabin was a desperate race against time. The horse, sensing his master's urgency, moved with uncharacteristic speed through the mud, his powerful legs churning. The rhythmic thud of Comanche's hooves became a desperate mantra in Elias's ears. Hold on. Just hold on. He thought of Sarah, of her quiet strength, her boundless compassion. She would have known what to do. She would have known how to comfort this broken child. He was a man of the land, of hard labor and stoic silence, not of gentle care. But he would try. He would do everything he could. Back at the cabin, Elias worked with a frantic, uncharacteristic speed. He stripped the girl of her wet clothes, his hands moving with surprising gentleness, and wrapped her in thick, dry blankets he pulled from his cedar chest. He lit a fire in the hearth, feeding it with dry kindling until a roaring blaze filled the small cabin with warmth and flickering light. He heated water on the old wood-burning stove, then, remembering his grandmother's remedies, mixed a spoonful of honey into a mug of lukewarm chamomile tea. He knelt by her side, pressing the warm mug against her still-cold lips, coaxing her to sip a few drops at a time. She stirred, a faint moan escaping her lips, her eyes fluttering open briefly before closing again. Her dark lashes were long and wet. Her face, though pale, was unmarred by any serious injury beyond the rope burns and the strange, smeared symbol on her forehead. The symbol. He looked at it more closely in the firelight. It wasn't mud. It was dried blood, smeared onto her skin, shaped into a distorted, mocking caricature of a tribal design. The venom of the act sent a fresh wave of nausea through him. He would deal with that later. For now, survival was all that mattered. As the warmth slowly seeped into her small body, her shivering began to subside, replaced by a deep, restful sleep. Elias sat beside her, watching her breathe, the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest a testament to her fragile hold on life. He covered her with another blanket, then turned his gaze to the roaring fire, his mind filled with questions that demanded answers. Who was she? What had happened to her? And who, in this quiet, forgotten valley, harbored such a deep, burning hatred that they would perform such a monstrous act of cruelty, leaving a child to die with a message of unspeakable malice? The sign, "White man, don't forgive," loomed in his mind, a dark, unsettling shadow over the fragile peace of his cabin. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was not the end of the rain. It was only the beginning of a storm, a reckoning that was long overdue in Harmony Creek. The night wore on, a long, anxious vigil beside the crackling fire. Elias sat on a low stool beside the makeshift bed he had prepared for the girl, his old rifle across his lap, a silent guardian. Sleep was impossible. Every rustle of leaves outside, every moan of the wind, sent a jolt of apprehension through him. He kept imagining shadowy figures, faces contorted by hatred, coming for her, coming for him. The chilling words on the sign, "White man, don't forgive," replayed in his mind, a constant, ugly whisper. He had lived in Harmony Creek for decades, had seen the simmering tensions, the quiet resentments between the white settlers and the Cherokee community whose ancestral lands had been taken piece by piece over generations. He had always tried to stay out of it, to mind his own business, to live his quiet, solitary life. But this was different. This wasn't a historical grievance. This was a living, breathing act of terror, directly in his backyard. It demanded action. As the first pale light of dawn began to bleed through the rain-streaked windows, the girl stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and wide, and she looked directly at him. Fear, raw and primal, flashed in their depths, and she scrambled back, pressing herself against the log wall, her small body trembling. "Easy, child," Elias said, his voice rough with disuse, but infused with a desperate gentleness. "You're safe here. My name is Elias. What's yours?" She stared at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was terrified. She looked around the small cabin, her eyes darting from the rough-hewn walls to the fire, to the rifle in his lap. Then her gaze fixed on his face, studying him with an intensity that belied her youth. She was assessing him, weighing her fear against the warmth of the blankets and the quiet kindness in his eyes. After a long, tense moment, she finally spoke, her voice a whisper barely audible. "Lily," she said. Her English was accented, but clear enough. "My name is Lily." "Lily," Elias repeated, a sense of profound relief washing over him. "A name, a connection. You're safe, Lily. No one will hurt you here." He kept his voice low and steady, trying to project a calm he didn't entirely feel. He wanted to ask her what happened, who did this to her, but he knew it was too soon. Her eyes were still wide with a trauma he could only guess at. He gently offered her the warm tea again. She hesitated, then slowly reached out a trembling hand and took the mug. She sipped it, her gaze never leaving his face. She was still terrified, but a fragile thread of trust was beginning to form between them. As she drank, Elias noticed the smeared blood on her forehead more clearly in the growing light. He reached out a hesitant hand, his fingers brushing near the mark. "What is this, Lily?" he asked, his voice low. She flinched, pulling back slightly, but didn't resist entirely. "They put it there," she whispered, her voice a small, broken sound. "The white men. They said it means I belong to them, that I'm marked." The words were a fresh stab of indignation for Elias. The deliberate humiliation, the symbolic ownership. It spoke of a deep-seated hatred that went beyond mere prejudice. This was ritualistic, a chilling echo of the brutal history that stained the land. "It doesn't mean anything, Lily," Elias said, his voice firm. "You don't belong to anyone. And this mark, it's just dirt. We'll wash it off." He went to the basin and wet a clean cloth, bringing it back to her. He gently wiped the smeared blood from her forehead, his touch as light as he could make it. She closed her eyes, a shiver running through her, but she didn't pull away. When he was done, her young, pale face was clean, unmarred by the hateful symbol. He looked into her eyes. The terror was still there, but a tiny spark of something else, something resilient, had begun to glow. "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice stronger this time. I need to go home. My family. They will be worried." The urgency in her voice was clear. He nodded. "We'll get you home, Lily. But first, you need to eat something. You need to get your strength back." He went to the small kitchen, his mind already formulating a plan. He couldn't just take her back to redemption. Thompson, and the casual prejudice he represented, was the last thing this traumatized child needed. He needed to find her family. He needed to find the Cherokee community, a place he had always avoided, a world he knew little about. He also knew, with a grim certainty, that whoever had done this to Lily would not want her found. They would want their message to stick. They would not want her to tell her story. He was no longer just a rancher. He was now a protector, a reluctant warrior drawn into a conflict he could not escape. The battle for Lily's safety and for a deeper justice had only just begun. Elias cooked a simple breakfast, warm oatmeal with a spoonful of the local honey he harvested from his own hives and a mug of hot milk. Lily ate slowly, hesitantly at first, but with a growing appetite, her small body absorbing the much-needed warmth and sustenance. As she ate, her color began to return, and some of the haunted look in her eyes softened. Elias watched her, a quiet gratitude in his chest. She was resilient, stronger than he might have first assumed. He cleaned her minor wounds, the rope burns on her wrists and ankles, with antiseptic and bandaged them, his hands surprisingly gentle. She flinched at the initial sting, but trusted his touch. "Where do you live, Lily?" he asked, once she had finished eating. "Where is your family?" She pointed vaguely northeast, toward the vast stretch of forest and hills that bordered his property, leading into the heart of the Cherokee Nation reservation. "The Pine Ridge settlement," she said, her voice still quiet. It's far." Elias knew the area. It was deep within the reservation lands, a place few white residents of Harmony Creek ever ventured, a place where the old ways and the new often clashed. It was also a place that had long been eyed by land developers and timber companies, its rich natural resources a source of constant friction and animosity between the two communities. "I'll take you there," Elias said, his voice firm. "But we have to be careful. Do you know who did this to you?" Lily flinched, her eyes widening with renewed fear. She shook her head, clutching her knees to her chest. "They had masks," she whispered. "White masks. And they spoke of the chief and the land." The mention of masks sent a fresh wave of unease through Elias. It spoke of organized malice, not just random bigotry. It meant these men were hiding something, that their actions were part of a larger, more sinister agenda. The reference to the chief and the land immediately pointed to the ongoing land disputes, particularly the contentious timber rights in the old-growth forests that bordered the reservation. For years, rumors had circulated about illegal logging operations, about pressure tactics used to force Cherokee landowners to sell. Mayor Silas Blackwood, the town's unofficial patriarch and a man whose personal wealth was built on land speculation and timber, was always at the center of those rumors. He was a man who saw land not as sacred, but as commodity, and anything or anyone standing in his way was an obstacle to be removed. Elias tightened. He had always avoided Blackwood, avoided the town's politics. He was a rancher, not a crusader. But Lily's presence, her quiet trauma, had dragged him into a conflict he could no longer ignore. He knew he couldn't just drop her off at the settlement and walk away. This was too dangerous. He needed to ensure her safety, and he needed to understand the true depth of the threat. He had to take her to the elders, the leaders of her community, and tell them what had happened. They would know what to do. They would know who these masked men were. He also knew that this act of bringing Lily back would be seen by those who had marked her as a direct challenge, a dangerous intervention. He was walking into a war he never intended to fight. He loaded his rifle, checked his revolver, and made sure he had enough ammunition. He might be an old rancher, but he was not defenseless. He also made sure he had some food, water, and extra blankets. The journey to Pine Ridge would be long and difficult, especially with Lily in her weakened state. He helped Lily bundle up in the warmest of his spare clothes, including an old, oversized wool sweater that swallowed her small frame but offered welcome warmth. Rusty, sensing the seriousness of the journey, sat by the door, watching them with intelligent, expectant eyes. As they prepared to leave, Elias took one last look at the comforting familiarity of his cabin, the sanctuary that had been his world for so long. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that when he returned, if he returned, the peace he had found here would be irrevocably shattered. He was stepping onto a path he had no idea how to navigate, into a conflict that felt as ancient as the hills themselves. But looking at Lily's small, brave face, at the determined set of her jaw, he knew he had no other choice. This was not just about saving a life. It was about fighting for a truth that had been denied, for a justice that was long overdue. The journey to the Pine Ridge settlement was slow and arduous. Elias rode Comanche, with Lily perched precariously in front of him, bundled against the cold, her small weight a constant reminder of her fragility. Rusty, ever vigilant, trotted beside them, his nose to the ground, sniffing out any unseen dangers. The terrain was challenging, a mix of dense forest, steep, muddy slopes, and treacherous creek crossings. Elias navigated with the practiced skill of a man who knew every twist and turn of the land, even the parts he rarely ventured into. The further they went, the more the natural world asserted itself. the distant hum of the highway fading into the whispers of the wind through the pines. Lily remained mostly silent, but she pointed occasionally, guiding him with hesitant gestures. She knew this land, her ancestral home, with an instinctual knowledge that transcended maps or signs. As they drew closer to Pine Ridge, the landscape began to change. The wild, untamed forest slowly gave way to signs of human habitation. A rough-hewn fence line, a wisp of smoke curling from a distant chimney, the faint sound of a dog barking. Elias felt a knot of apprehension tighten in his stomach. He was entering a world that had always been separate from his own, a world that had every reason to be wary of a white man, especially one bringing a traumatized child from a dark encounter. Finally, through a thinning of the trees, they saw it, Pine Ridge. It wasn't a town in the traditional sense, but a cluster of modest, weathered homes, some traditional log cabins, others small, prefabricated structures, all nestled deep within a valley, almost hidden from the outside world. Smoke curled lazily from stone chimneys, and the faint scent of wood smoke mingled with the damp earth. Children's laughter drifted on the breeze, a sound that pierced the solemn quiet of the forest, a sound that held a fragile hope. As they approached the edge of the settlement, a young man, sharp-eyed and wary, emerged from the trees, a rifle held casually in his hands. He wore simple, practical clothes, and his face was impassive. He stopped them, his gaze going immediately to Lily, then to Elias, his expression hardening. "State your business, white man," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Lily, seeing him, suddenly clung tighter to Elias. "It's okay, Lily," Elias murmured. He dismounted carefully, helping Lily slide to the ground. "My name is Elias Vance. I found this girl, Lily, by Willow Creek. She was in trouble. I brought her here." The young man's eyes, dark and piercing, narrowed slightly as he took in Lily's bruised wrists and the lingering traces of fear in her eyes. His gaze then shifted to Elias's muddy clothes, the worn rifle, the general air of a man who had been through a struggle. He seemed to be weighing the story, searching for deception. "Lily," he asked, turning to the girl, his voice softening imperceptibly, "are you all right? Who is this man?" Lily looked from the young man to Elias, a flicker of uncertainty on her face. Then she spoke, her voice still quiet but firm. "He saved me, John. He helped me." The young man, John, relaxed marginally. He looked at Elias with a new, grudging respect. "Follow me," he said, turning and leading them into the heart of the settlement. The residents of Pine Ridge emerged from their homes as they passed, their faces a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and concern. Whispers followed them, glances exchanged. Elias felt the weight of their gaze, the unspoken history that hung in the air between their two communities. He kept his gaze steady, his posture upright, projecting a quiet resolve. He was here to help, not to threaten. John led them to a larger, central log house, its entrance adorned with intricate carvings. It was clearly the gathering place, the home of the elders. He ushered them inside. The room was warm, filled with the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs. Several older men and women were seated around a low table, their faces etched with the wisdom of years. At the head of the table sat an old woman, her face a network of deep wrinkles, her eyes sharp and intelligent, radiating in ancient strength. This was Grandmother Willow, the acknowledged leader and spiritual guide of Pine Ridge. Her gaze fixed on Elias with an intensity that seemed to peel back the layers of his soul. Grandmother Willow's gaze was like a physical presence, penetrating and unblinking. It was a look that seemed to see not just the man standing before her, but the entire history of his people and hers, the generations of conflict and misunderstanding etched into the very land they stood upon. Elias felt a strange mix of apprehension and respect. She was clearly a woman of immense authority, a quiet force of nature. He stood before her, Lily clutching his hand, his muddy boots tracking dirt onto her clean, woven mats. The air in the elders' lodge was thick with unspoken questions, with the wary silence of a community that had learned, through bitter experience, to distrust outsiders. The young man, John, spoke first, his voice deferential. "Grandmother, this is Elias Vance. He brought Lily. She says he helped her." Grandmother Willow did not immediately acknowledge Elias. Her gaze remained fixed on Lily, her eyes softening with a deep maternal concern. "Lily, child," she said, her voice a low, melodic rumble, surprisingly strong for a woman of her apparent age. "Are you hurt? What happened?" Lily, still clutching Elias's hand, took a deep, trembling breath and, in her native tongue, began to recount the horrifying ordeal. Her words, though incomprehensible to Elias, were punctuated by sobs and shudders, the raw emotion clear in her voice. The faces of the elders grew grim as she spoke, their eyes darkening with anger and sorrow. When Lily finished, there was a heavy silence. Grandmother Willow closed her eyes for a moment, her face a mask of profound grief and indignation. Then she opened them and turned her piercing gaze back to Elias. She says, Grandmother Willow translated, her voice now cold and hard, that she was taken from her home yesterday evening. She was going to her friend's house. She says she was blindfolded, taken far into the woods. She says they tied her, and then they hung her from a tree by a creek. And they put a sign on the tree, a sign that said, "White man, don't forgive." Elias felt a fresh wave of sick rage. The deliberate retelling of the sign, spoken in this sacred place, was a powerful, chilling indictment. "I saw the sign," Elias confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "I cut her down. She was barely alive. They smeared blood on her forehead. They said she was marked." Grandmother Willow's eyes narrowed, a flicker of raw pain in their depths. "The marking," she said, her voice low, "that is an ancient symbol, a sacred tribal mark of protection and belonging. They twisted it. They defiled it. They want her to carry their shame, to know she's outcast, to feel like she has been cast out by her own people, and to feel as if she has been cursed by the white man. They want her to be a living warning to us." Her gaze hardened, locking onto Elias's. "Do you know who did this, Elias Vance? Do you know who in your world harbors such sickness in their hearts?" Elias hesitated. He had no definitive proof, no names, but he had a powerful, gut-wrenching suspicion. The land disputes, the rumors, the casual cruelty of men like Thompson, and above all, the pervasive, manipulative power of Mayor Silas Blackwood. "I don't have names, grandmother," he said, his voice grim. "But there's a man in redemption. Mayor Silas Blackwood. He owns a lot of land, and he has a lot of people working for him. He's been trying to push the nation to sell off more of your timberland. He uses strong-arm tactics, and he has a reputation for." He trailed off, knowing the rest didn't need to be said. Blackwood's reputation was well known amongst those who paid attention. A man who bent rules, broke spirits, and bought silence. Grandmother Willow nodded slowly, her expression grim. "Silas Blackwood, the serpent. We have known of him and his hunger for many years. He is a sickness that has festered in this valley. We knew he would grow bolder, but to touch a child, to defile her with such hatred." Her voice trailed off, filled with a sorrow so deep it seemed to resonate in the very walls of the lodge. "Lily," she said, turning back to the girl, her voice gentle again. "Did you see anything? Hear anything? Anything that might tell us who these men were, besides their white masks?" Lily nodded slowly, her eyes wide. "They talked about a meeting, a big meeting, and a map. They said the map would show them where to go. They talked about the next phase, and they said they needed to finish it before anyone knew she was missing." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They said it was about the old sacred burial ground. They said they were going to clear it." The words hit Elias like a blow. The sacred burial ground. It was an ancient, revered site deep within the protected forest, a place known only to the Cherokee elders. It was considered inviolable, a resting place for generations. If Blackwood was targeting that, it meant his plans were far more ambitious, far more destructive than anyone had imagined. It meant he was not just interested in timber, but in erasing the very history and identity of the Cherokee people from the land. The stakes had just escalated dramatically. He was no longer just protecting a lost girl. He was now embroiled in a battle for land, for heritage, for justice that spanned generations. The revelation about the sacred burial ground sent a collective tremor through the elders. Grandmother Willow's face, already etched with sorrow, tightened into a mask of grim determination. John, the young man who had first greeted them, clenched his fists, his eyes burning with controlled fury. The silence in the lodge was no longer just wary. It was charged with a palpable sense of outrage and resolve. The burial ground, Grandmother Willow repeated, her voice a low, dangerous rumble. That is where our ancestors rest, where our history is written in the earth. To clear it, that is an act of war. She looked at Elias, her gaze piercing. You have seen their sickness, white man. You have seen what they do in the dark. Will you stand with us? Or will you turn away, as so many have before? The question was a challenge, a test of his resolve. Elias met her gaze without flinching. He had lived a life of quiet neutrality, but the sight of Lily, the chilling message, the desecration of her very spirit, had shattered that neutrality forever. I will stand with you, grandmother, Elias said, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. Lily saved me as much as I saved her. She pulled me out of my own darkness. I owe her, and I owe this land. What do we do? Grandmother Willow nodded, a flicker of approval in her eyes. Lily's words about a meeting and the next phase are critical. Silas Blackwood is a snake, and he moves in shadows. But he is also a greedy man. He'll be planning a public display, a legal facade, to justify his desecration. We must find out when and where this meeting will take place. And we must expose him. John stepped forward. Grandmother, I can move through redemption unseen. I have sources, people who hear things. I could try to get information. Good, John, she replied. Be careful. Blackwood's eyes and ears are everywhere. Elias, your presence in redemption might attract less suspicion if you are seen as a regular customer, not an ally to our people. You will be our eyes and ears in plain sight. Elias understood. He was to be a spy in his own town, observing, listening, gathering intelligence. It was a role he never imagined playing, but one he would embrace for Lily and for the justice that was due. The plan was rough, but it was a start. John would use his network within the community. Whispers and rumors gathered from the fringes. Elias would go to the general store, the diner, the places where the town's gossip flowed. He would listen for any mention of Blackwood's plans, any unusual gatherings, any hints about the next phase of his timber operation. Over the next few days, the rain finally subsided, and a pale, watery sun emerged. Elias returned to his ranch, leaving Lily safe in the care of Grandmother Willow and the women of Pine Ridge. But his solitude was different now. It was no longer empty. It was charged with purpose. He rode into redemption, a town he had always avoided, with a newfound alertness. He bought his supplies, but he lingered, nursing a cup of coffee at the diner, pretending to read the local newspaper at the general store. He listened. He observed. The town buzzed with whispers, but they were vague, disjointed. Blackwood was seen frequently at the town hall. His cronies, a group of burly, rough-hewn men who worked for his logging company, were unusually active, driving trucks laden with heavy equipment, moving around the outskirts of town. He overheard snippets of conversation. Big things happening, Blackwood's making a move, finally getting rid of the deadweight. The veiled references to deadweight sent a shiver down Elias's spine. It was a chilling euphemism for the Cherokee people, a dehumanizing term that spoke volumes about the casual racism that underpinned Blackwood's ambitions. One afternoon at the general store, Elias saw him. Mayor Silas Blackwood. He was a corpulent man, his face flushed with self-importance, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the worn work clothes of the townsfolk. He was laughing loudly with a group of men, gesturing expansively with a cigar. Elias caught a fragment of conversation. Press conference, official announcement, next Tuesday. Town hall, clearing the way. Elias's heart hammered. Clearing the way. It was a phrase loaded with sinister implications, especially when combined with Lily's words about clearing the burial ground. This was it. The official facade, the public display. Blackwood was making his move. He knew the time and place. Now, he needed proof. Irrefutable proof of Blackwood's true intentions. Something that could be presented to an authority outside of Blackwood's reach. An idea, daring and dangerous, began to form in Elias's mind. A plan that would require him to venture into the serpent's den itself. He had to find the map Lily had spoken of. The map that showed them where to go. The map that would expose Blackwood's true, nefarious plot. Elias knew that finding a map, any map, in Blackwood's possession would be nearly impossible without direct access to his office or home. And breaking into either was a risky, almost suicidal proposition for a reclusive rancher. But the stakes were too high. Lily's ordeal, the desecrated burial ground, the generational injustice. It all coalesced into an unyielding resolve within him. He was no longer just a bystander. He was a participant in a fight for something far larger than himself. He returned to Pine Ridge, his grim face conveying the urgency of his news. Grandmother Willow listened intently as he recounted the snippets of conversation he'd overheard, the confirmation of the Tuesday press conference, the chilling phrase clearing the way. Her eyes, already burdened with the sorrow of her people, narrowed with a cold, righteous anger. He will use the law as a shield, she said, her voice low. He will declare it progress, economic development. He will erase our past as if it never existed. Lily said they talked about a map, Elias stated, his gaze fixed on the old woman. A map showing them where to go. I think that map might be our proof. It could show the burial ground is marked for clearing. John, who had been listening in silence, frowned. Blackwood's office is like a fortress, and his house even more so. He's paranoid. He has guards, dogs. Then we have to be smarter, Elias replied, a steely glint in his eye. We need to know his habits, his weaknesses, and we need a plan. John reluctantly agreed to help. His initial suspicion of Elias now replaced by a grudging respect forged in their shared concern for Lily and their community. Over the next few days, Elias and John worked in a quiet, intense collaboration. John, with his knowledge of the town's undercurrents, gathered intelligence. He learned that Blackwood had a weekly poker game at a secluded lodge outside of town every Monday night. He also discovered that Blackwood had a personal safe in his office at the timber company headquarters, a large, imposing building on the edge of redemption. This was the most likely place for such a map. The plan began to solidify, risky and desperate, but their only option. On Monday night, as the clock ticked closer to the Tuesday press conference, Elias and John moved under the cloak of darkness. Elias, disguised in an old, dusty work coat and a wide-brimmed hat to obscure his face, drove his truck into Redemption, parking it several blocks from Blackwood's timber company building. John, with his innate stealth, had already slipped into the shadows, a silent ghost in his own town. Helped Harmony Creek find its true name once more. He found his own way back to the living, proving that even in the deepest despair, hope can be found, springing from the most unexpected acts of human connection. For truly, the kindness of one heart can begin to mend the wounds of generations, ushering in a future where all can find their place and their voice.